The stagecoach rolled into Salt Lake City, Utah, on a blistering afternoon in July of 1873, carrying a woman who had just buried her father 3 weeks prior and now owned nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart too big for her own good. Grace Palmer stepped down onto the dusty street, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, her green eyes surveying the bustling frontier town with equal parts trepidation and determination. She had come west with $50 sewn into the hem of her skirt and a letter of introduction to a woman named Mrs. Henderson, who ran a boarding house and might have work for a respectable young woman of 23. The sun beat down mercilessly as Grace adjusted her worn traveling dress and picked up her single carpet bag, trying to ignore the stares of the rough-looking men lounging outside the saloon across the street. She had taken only 3 steps when a child nearly knocked her over. A little girl of perhaps 6 years old, with wild blonde curls and a face streaked with tears and dirt. The girl stumbled into Grace's skirts and clung there, sobbing something incomprehensible. Grace immediately set down her bag and knelt, her instinct to comfort overriding everything else. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you hurt?" Grace asked gently, examining the child for injuries. "I cannot find Papa," the girl wailed. "I was supposed to stay by the mercantile, but I saw a puppy, and now I do not know where I am." Grace smoothed the child's hair back from her forehead. "It is all right. We will find your papa together. What is your name?" "Lily," the girl hiccuped. "Lily Quinn." "Well, Miss Lily Quinn, my name is Grace Palmer, and I promise we will find your father. Can you tell me what he looks like?" Before Lily could answer, a man's voice called out, rough with panic and relief mixed together. "Lily! Lily! Thank God!" Grace looked up to see a man running toward them, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that bore the weathered lines of someone who had seen more than his share of hardship. He wore dusty work clothes and boots that had seen better days, and as he drew closer, Grace could see that his eyes were a startling blue, currently filled with such raw emotion that it made her breath catch. The man dropped to his knees beside them, pulling his daughter into his arms with a force that spoke of genuine terror at having lost her. "Do not ever do that again," he said, his voice breaking. "Do not ever run off like that. I thought I had lost you." "I am sorry, Papa," Lily sobbed against his chest. "I just wanted to see the puppy." The man held her for a long moment, his eyes squeezed shut, before he seemed to remember that someone else was present. He opened his eyes and looked at Grace, and she saw him take in her appearance in one swift, assessing glance. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for staying with her." "Of course," Grace said softly, standing and brushing off her skirt. "I could not leave a frightened child alone." The man stood as well, keeping one hand firmly on Lily's shoulder. He was even taller than Grace had thought, easily over 6 feet, and there was something about him that suggested barely contained strength and a weariness that went bone deep. "I am Adam Quinn," he said, offering his free hand, "and I am in your debt." Grace shook his hand, noting the calluses and the strength in his grip. "Grace Palmer, and you owe me nothing? I am only glad she is safe." Adam Quinn looked at her for a moment longer, something flickering in his eyes that might have been curiosity or interest, but then Lily tugged on his hand. "Papa, I am hungry." "I know, sweetheart. We will get you something." He looked back at Grace. "Are you new in town?" "Just arrived," Grace confirmed. "I am looking for Mrs. Henderson's boarding house." "That is just down the street," Adam said, pointing. "The White House with the blue shutters. Tell her Adam Quinn sent you. She is a fair woman." Before Grace could respond, another child appeared. This one, a boy of perhaps 8 with Adam's dark hair and blue eyes. "Papa, Thomas and Sarah are fighting again, and Michael says his stomach hurts." Adam's jaw tightened, and Grace saw a flash of something that might have been desperation cross his face. "All right, Daniel, tell them I am coming." He looked at Grace apologetically. "I have to go, but thank you again, Miss Palmer." Grace watched him walk away, Lily's hand in his and Daniel trailing behind, and she wondered at the exhaustion in his voice when he had said his son's name. She picked up her carpet bag and made her way down the street to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, pushing thoughts of the handsome, harried man out of her mind. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a plump, gray-haired woman in her 50s, with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Grace up and down, read the letter of introduction from Grace's late father's sister, and then nodded once. I can give you a room and meals in exchange for help with the cooking and cleaning. The work is hard and the boarders can be difficult, but I run a respectable establishment. No drinking, no gambling, and certainly no entertaining men in your room." "That suits me perfectly," Grace said with genuine relief. "Good. You can start tomorrow. Today, get yourself settled. Supper is at 6. Mrs. Henderson paused, her expression softening slightly. "I am sorry about your father, girl. It is hard to lose family." Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thank you." Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the street. Grace unpacked her few belongings, washed the travel dust from her face and hands, and tried not to think about how different this life was going to be from the one she had known in Boston. Her father had been a clerk, not wealthy but respectable, and Grace had helped him keep house after her mother died when Grace was 15. They had managed well enough until her father's lungs gave out last winter, leaving Grace with nothing but debts and the knowledge that she had to make her own way in the world. At supper that evening, Grace met the other boarders, 2 miners, a clerk from the land office, a widow who did sewing, and a traveling salesman who was only staying a few days. They were polite but curious, asking Grace the usual questions about where she was from and what had brought her west. Grace answered as briefly as politeness allowed, grateful when Mrs. Henderson steered the conversation to other topics. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn and helped Mrs. Henderson prepare breakfast for the boarders. The work was indeed hard, but Grace had never been afraid of hard work. She scrubbed floors, beat rugs, peeled potatoes, and kneaded bread dough until her arms ached. Mrs. Henderson was exacting, but fair, and by the end of the first week, Grace felt that she had found at least a temporary place for herself. She saw Adam Quinn twice more in passing during those first days. Once, she glimpsed him loading lumber onto a wagon outside the general store, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sweat glistening on his forearms. Another time, she saw him walking down the street with what appeared to be 3 more children in tow, all of them talking at once while Adam listened with the patient, exhausted expression of a man stretched too thin. It was Mrs. Henderson who told her the story. They were sitting in the kitchen late one evening, snapping beans for the next day's supper, when the older woman said, "I saw you looking at Adam Quinn the other day. He is a good man, but he has had more than his share of trouble." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "I was not looking at him in any particular way. He helped me find your house when I first arrived, that is all." Mrs. Henderson gave her a knowing look, but did not press the point. "He came here 5 years ago with his first wife, Mary. She was a delicate thing, beautiful, but not suited for frontier life. She gave him 2 children, Daniel and Sarah, and then she left him. Packed up one day while he was working and took the stage back east. Broke his heart." Grace's hands stilled on the beans. "She left her children? Said she could not bear this life another day. Adam tried to make her stay, but you cannot make someone love a place or a life they hate." Mrs. Henderson shook her head. 2 years later, he married again. A widow named Catherine who had a girl of her own, Lily. Catherine was tougher than Mary, but she and Adam were never really suited. They fought all the time, loud enough that the whole town heard. They had twins together, Thomas and Michael, but Catherine left too, eventually. Took the stage to California and left all 3 children with Adam. "That is terrible," Grace said softly. "It gets worse." About a year after that, Adam married a 3rd time, a woman named Rose who seemed kind enough. She gave him another daughter, Emma, but Rose died of fever last winter. Left Adam with 7 children and a ranch that barely pays enough to keep them all fed. Mrs. Henderson's expression was both pitying and admiring. "He does his best, but a man alone cannot raise 7 children and run a ranch. His oldest Daniel is only 10. The youngest Emma is barely a year old." Grace felt something twist in her chest, a combination of sympathy and something else she could not quite name. "Does he have no family to help him?" "None. His parents are dead, and Rose's people want nothing to do with him or the baby. They blamed him for her death, said he worked her too hard." Mrs. Henderson resumed snapping beans. "He brings the children into town once a week for supplies, and you can see how tired he is. People help where they can, but everyone has their own troubles. It is a hard life out here." Grace thought about Adam Quinn and his 7 children often over the next few weeks. She saw them occasionally, always in town for supplies or some errand, and each time she noted how the children seemed well cared for despite everything. They were clean, their clothes were mended, and they clearly loved their father. But Adam himself looked more worn down each time she saw him, the lines around his eyes deepening, his shoulders bowing under the weight of his responsibilities. It was late August when Grace encountered Adam and his entire brood outside the general store. She had been sent to pick up a package for Mrs. Henderson, and she arrived just as chaos erupted. The baby, Emma, was crying in a makeshift sling on Adam's chest. Two of the middle children, the twins Thomas and Michael, were arguing loudly about something. Sarah, a pretty girl of about 9 with her father's dark hair, was trying to herd Lily away from a display of candy. And Daniel, the oldest, stood off to one side, looking overwhelmed and embarrassed by his siblings. Adam was trying to manage all of them, while also attempting to pay for his supplies, and Grace could see the merchant growing impatient. Without thinking, Grace set down her own package and walked over. "May I help?" she asked quietly. Adam looked at her, and for a moment she saw naked relief in his eyes before pride shuttered it away. "I can manage." "I am sure you can," Grace said calmly. "But I am here, and I have 2 hands that are not currently occupied. Perhaps I could hold Emma while you finish your business?" Adam hesitated, then nodded once, already reaching to untie the sling. "She just ate, so she should settle down. She just does not like being jostled." Grace took the baby carefully, settling the small, warm weight against her shoulder. Emma hiccuped once, and then miraculously quieted. Grace swayed gently, rubbing the baby's back, while Adam turned back to the merchant. She watched as he efficiently sorted out his purchases, kept one eye on the twins, and managed to extract Lily from the candy display all at once. When everything was paid for and loaded into the wagon outside, Adam took Emma back, his fingers brushing Grace's as he did. The contact was brief but electric, and Grace saw something flicker in his eyes that suggested he had felt it too. "Thank you," he said. "Again, it seems." "You are welcome," Grace replied. She looked at the 7 children arrayed around the wagon and felt her heart swell with an emotion she could not quite name. "You have a beautiful family, Mr. Quinn." Adam's expression was complicated, a mix of pride and pain and exhaustion. "They are a handful." "They are children," Grace said simply. "Children are supposed to be a handful. It means they are healthy and alive and full of spirit." Daniel, who had been listening, looked at Grace with something like gratitude. Sarah smiled shyly. Even the twins stopped their bickering for a moment. Adam studied Grace for a long moment. "You are kind, Miss Palmer. Too kind, perhaps." "I do not think there is such a thing as too much kindness," Grace said. Something in Adam's expression shifted, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. "Would you consider coming out to the ranch, just for a day perhaps? I could use help getting the house properly cleaned, and Sarah has been trying to learn to bake bread, but I am not much of a teacher. I can pay you, not much, but something." Grace should have said no. She had her duties at the boarding house, and it was not proper for an unmarried woman to spend time alone with a widower, even with 7 children as chaperones. But she heard herself say, "I would be happy to help. Sunday is my day off. I could come then." Relief washed over Adam's face so clearly that Grace felt her throat tighten. "Sunday then. Daniel can come fetch you in the morning." That Sunday dawned clear and hot, and Grace dressed in her simplest work dress and packed a basket with some supplies from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen. The older woman had raised her eyebrows when Grace told her where she was going, but had not objected, only warned her to be careful of her reputation. Daniel arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, driving a wagon that had seen better days. He was a serious boy with his father's eyes and a manner that suggested he had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Papa said to thank you for coming," he said, as Grace climbed up beside him. "The house is a mess. He tries, but with the ranch work and the baby and everything else, there is not enough time." The Quinn Ranch was about 5 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a house that needed paint, and several outbuildings in various states of repair. But the land itself was beautiful, rolling hills dotted with cattle, and a creek that sparkled in the morning sun. Grace could see why someone would want to make a life here, even if that life was hard. Adam came out of the house as they pulled up, Emma on his hip and flower in his hair. He looked embarrassed and relieved in equal measure. "Thank you for coming. I apologize for the state of things." Grace climbed down from the wagon and took in the scene. The house was indeed a mess, with laundry piled everywhere, dishes in the sink, and toys scattered across every surface. But it was not dirty, just chaotic. the inevitable result of one man trying to do the work of three people. "There is nothing to apologize for," Grace said firmly. "You are doing the work of an entire household on your own. Now, where shall I start?" Over the next several hours, Grace worked alongside Adam and the children to bring order to the chaos. She taught Sarah how to knead bread dough properly, showing the girl how to fold and press until the texture was just right. She helped Daniel mend a shirt that had torn at the seam. She played with Lily and supervised the twins while they picked up their toys. And she held Emma whenever the baby fussed, walking her around the house and singing softly until the little one settled. Adam worked too, fixing a broken chair and chopping firewood and doing a dozen other tasks that had been neglected. But Grace noticed that he kept glancing at her, watching how she interacted with his children, and there was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. It was late afternoon when they finally stopped for a rest. Grace had prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and they all sat around the big kitchen table, the children chattering and laughing. Adam sat at the head of the table, Emma drowsing in his lap, and for the first time since Grace had met him, he looked almost peaceful. After supper, Grace helped Sarah wash the dishes while Adam put the younger children to bed. When she was done, she found him sitting on the front porch, the last of the daylight painting the sky, orange and pink. He looked up as she approached and gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit, please. You have earned a rest." Grace sat, suddenly aware that they were alone for the first time all day. The evening air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. It should have been awkward, but instead it felt comfortable, natural. "Your children are wonderful," Grace said after a moment. "You have done well with them." Adam let out a long breath. "Have I? Most days I feel like I'm failing them. Daniel has to help too much. Sarah mothers the little ones when she should be playing. The twins run wild half the time, and Emma barely knows me because I am always working." "They are healthy and happy and loved," Grace said firmly. "That is what matters. The rest is just details." Adam turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were very blue. "You are an unusual woman, Miss Palmer." "Grace," she said. "Please call me Grace." "Grace," he repeated, and the way he said her name made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Why did you really come out here today? You did not have to help me. Most people in town think I am a fool for having so many children, for marrying so many times and failing each time." Grace met his gaze steadily. "I came because you needed help, and I could give it. As for the rest, I do not think you are a fool. I think you are a man who has had bad luck, but who keeps trying anyway. That takes courage." Adam was quiet for a long moment. "My first wife left because she hated it here. My second left because she hated me. My third died before I could really know if we would make it or not. I am beginning to think I am not meant for marriage, but I cannot raise these children alone. I do not know what to do." Grace's heart ached for him, for the pain and confusion in his voice. "You are not doing it alone. You have your children, and they help as much as they can. And you have people in town who care about you, even if they do not always show it. You are stronger than you think." Adam looked at her for a long moment, and Grace saw something shift in his expression, something that made her breath catch. "When I saw you that first day, holding Lily and looking at her like she was the most important thing in the world, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Not just pretty, though you are that, but beautiful in a way that goes deeper. I have thought about you every day since then." Grace's heart was pounding now, so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Adam, I know I have no right to say these things. I am a widower with 7 children and a ranch that barely makes ends meet. I have failed at marriage 3 times. I have nothing to offer you except hard work and more responsibility than any woman should have to bear. But I need you to know that you have been a light in my life, even in these few short weeks. When I am with you, I feel like maybe I can do this after all." Grace reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His hand was warm and rough and strong, and holding it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You have not failed, Adam. You loved women who were not right for you or who were not right for this life. That is not the same as failing, and as for what you have to offer, you are wrong. You have a good heart and strong hands and 7 children who love you. That is more than many men can say." Adam turned his hand to grip hers more firmly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "If I asked you to come back next Sunday, would you?" "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "And the Sunday after that?" "Yes." Adam lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am going to court you, Grace Palmer, properly the way a woman like you deserves. And if you will have me, if you can bear the thought of taking on a man with 7 children and more troubles than sense, then I am going to marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I think I would like that very much." They sat together on the porch as the stars came out, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. Adam told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west with dreams of making something of himself. Grace told him about her father, about the quiet life they had led in Boston, and how strange and wonderful it was to be out here where the sky went on forever. They talked until the moon was high, and Daniel came out to tell Grace that he should drive her back to town before it got any later. The ride back was quiet, but Grace's mind was racing. She had known Adam Quinn for less than a month, and yet she felt as if she had been waiting for him all her life. There was something about him, about the way he looked at her, and the way his hand had felt in hers, that made her certain she was making the right choice. Over the next several weeks, Adam courted Grace with a determination that was both touching and slightly overwhelming. He came into town every few days, always with some excuse about needing supplies or having business at the land office, but really just to see her. He brought her wildflowers picked from the hills around his ranch. He invited her to church with him and the children, sitting beside her in the pew with Emma on his lap and his shoulder pressed against hers. He wrote her letters, awkward and earnest, telling her about his days and his hopes for the future. Grace fell in love with him slowly, and then all at once. She loved the way he was with his children, patient and firm and full of quiet affection. She loved his strength and his honesty and the way he never pretended to be anything other than what he was. She loved his laugh, rare but genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and necessary. But more than that, she fell in love with the idea of the life they could build together. She had always wanted children, a family, a home of her own. The fact that Adam already had 7 children did not daunt her. Instead, it felt like a gift, like she was being handed a ready-made family, and all she had to do was love them. The children, for their part, took to Grace with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Daniel was cautious at first, protective of his father, and wary of another woman who might leave. But Grace won him over by treating him like the young man he was trying to be, asking his opinion and trusting him with real responsibilities. Sarah attached herself to Grace immediately, hungry for a mother figure and delighted to have another woman in the house. Lily was affectionate with everyone and climbed into Grace's lap whenever possible. The twins, Thomas and Michael, were wild and rambunctious, but responded well to Grace's firm but loving discipline. And Emma, too young to understand anything except that Grace smelled nice and had gentle hands, gurgled happily whenever Grace held her. It was Sarah who inadvertently forced the issue. It was a Sunday in late September, and Grace had spent the day at the ranch as had become her custom. She was helping Sarah practice her letters when the girl looked up and said, "Are you going to marry Papa?" Grace felt her cheeks flush. "Why do you ask that?" "Because he looks at you the way I heard people look at someone they want to marry. And because we need a mama. Emma needs one especially, but we all do." Sarah's expression was hopeful and just a little bit desperate. "Please say you will. Please do not leave like the others did." Grace's heart twisted. She pulled Sarah into a hug, feeling the girl tremble against her. "I am not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise. But will you marry him? Will you stay forever?" Grace looked up to see Adam standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met, and Grace saw the question there, the fear and the hope mixed together. "Yes," Grace said, looking at Adam but speaking to Sarah. "If your father asks me, I will marry him, and I will never leave. That is a promise." Adam crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Grace to her feet, his hands cupping her face. "I was going to wait," he said hoarsely. "I was going to give you more time, make sure you were certain, but I cannot wait any more. Grace Palmer, will you marry me? Will you take me and my 7 children and this hard life and make it something beautiful? Because I swear to you, I will love you every day for the rest of my life. I will work until my hands bleed to give you a good home. I will never give you cause to regret choosing me." Grace put her hands over his, feeling the calluses and the strength. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Adam, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and desperate and full of promise. Sarah cheered, and a moment later, the other children came running, drawn by the commotion. When Adam finally pulled back, they were surrounded by 7 children, all of them talking at once and demanding to know what was happening. "Grace has agreed to marry me," Adam announced, his voice rough with emotion. "She is going to be your mother." The children erupted in celebration. Even Daniel, who had been so cautious, allowed himself to smile. Grace found herself passed from child to child, each one hugging her and asking questions about the wedding and when she would move to the ranch. Adam watched with an expression of such profound relief and happiness that Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Salt Lake City, with Mrs. Henderson and half the town in attendance. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson and Sarah had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Lily had picked. Adam wore his best suit, brushed and mended for the occasion, and he looked at Grace as if she were the answer to every prayer he had ever uttered. The Reverend kept the ceremony short, which was good because Emma fussed through most of it, and the twins could not sit still. But when Adam took Grace's hand and promised to love and cherish her for all the days of his life, his voice was steady and sure, and when Grace promised the same, she meant it with every fiber of her being. They had a simple celebration afterward at the ranch, with food donated by neighbors and friends. Grace danced with Adam in the yard while the children chased each other, and the sun set in a blaze of gold and orange. It was not fancy or elaborate, but it was perfect. And when Adam whispered in her ear that he loved her, Grace knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Adam and Grace stood together in the room that was now theirs. Grace had moved her few belongings out to the ranch the day before, and seeing them mixed with Adam's made something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness and home. Adam pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I cannot believe you are really here, that you chose this, chose us." Grace pulled back to look at him, her hands on his chest. "I chose love, Adam. I chose a man who works himself to exhaustion for his children, who has been knocked down 3 times and gotten up each time, who looks at me like I hung the moon. How could I not choose that?" Adam kissed her, slow and deep, and Grace felt heat curl through her body. "I will make you happy," he promised against her lips. "I swear it." "You already have," Grace said simply. The months that followed were not easy. Grace quickly learned that running a household with 7 children and a working ranch was more difficult than she had imagined. There were always meals to prepare, clothes to mend, children to discipline, and a dozen other tasks that needed doing. The house was never truly clean, there was never enough time, and Grace fell into bed exhausted every night. But she was happy, happier than she had ever been in her carefully ordered life in Boston. She loved waking up to Adam's arms around her, loved the sound of children laughing in the next room, loved the way the sun rose over the hills and painted everything gold. She loved being needed, being part of something bigger than herself. The children flourished under her care. Daniel relaxed, becoming more of a boy and less of a miniature adult. Sarah bloomed, learning to cook and sew and read, with a voraciousness that delighted Grace. Lily's wild energy was channeled into helping with the younger children and the animals. The twins calmed down under Grace's firm but loving discipline, learning that there were consequences for their actions, but also that they were deeply loved. And Emma, the baby, grew plump and happy, calling Grace Mama before she said any other word. Adam, too, changed. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes faded. He laughed more, smiled more, touched Grace whenever he passed her, as if he needed the reassurance that she was real. He still worked hard, but now he had help, and the ranch began to prosper in small but important ways. They bought more cattle, fixed the roof, painted the house. It was not much, but it was progress, and it was theirs. There were difficult moments, of course. In November, Sarah came down with a fever that had Grace sitting up with her for 3 nights straight, bathing her forehead and praying. When the fever finally broke, Grace wept with relief in Adam's arms. In December, one of the cows died during a difficult birth, and Adam was in a black mood for days, worried about the lost income. But Grace held him and reminded him that they had each other, and that was what mattered most. It was in late January, in the cold depth of winter, that Grace realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she finally told Adam they were sitting by the fire after the children had gone to bed, Grace mending and Adam reading the newspaper that was already 2 weeks old by the time it reached them. "Adam," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately alert to the tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Grace said, setting down her mending. "Better than fine. I am going to have a baby." Adam stared at her, his expression going through a series of rapid changes: shock, joy, fear, and then a complicated mixture of all three. "A baby," he repeated. "Grace, that is wonderful. But are you sure? Are you feeling well? Do you need to see the doctor?" Grace laughed, touched by his concern. "I am sure, and I am well. Women have been having babies for thousands of years, Adam. I will be fine." Adam crossed to her and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "A baby," he said again, his voice full of wonder. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Grace asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know 7 children is already a great deal." "Happy?" Adam pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "Grace, I am terrified and thrilled, and so grateful I can barely breathe. You have given me so much already, and now this. I do not deserve you." "You deserve everything," Grace said fiercely. "You deserve love and happiness and a life that is good, and I am going to make sure you have it." They told the children the next day, and the reactions were mixed. Daniel looked pleased but also worried, clearly concerned about adding another mouth to feed. Sarah was thrilled, already planning how she would help with the baby. Lily wanted to know if it would be a brother or sister, and the twins wanted to know when they could play with it. Emma, not quite 2, had no opinion. As winter turned to spring and Grace's belly grew, the ranch came alive with new energy. Adam planted a larger garden, determined that they would have enough vegetables to see them through the next winter. Grace taught Sarah more advanced cooking and sewing, preparing the girl to take on more responsibility when the baby came. Daniel took on more of the ranch work, proving himself capable and responsible. Even the twins helped, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs with only occasional mishaps. Grace worked as long as she was able, but as her pregnancy advanced, Adam grew more and more protective. By late July, he was barely letting her lift anything heavier than a spoon, and he hovered constantly, driving Grace to distraction. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening, exasperated. "Women work up until the day they give birth. I am not going to break." "I know," Adam said, but his eyes were haunted. "But Rose worked right up until the end, and then she died. I cannot lose you, Grace. I cannot." Grace's irritation melted. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "I am not Rose, and I am strong and healthy, and we have a good doctor in town. I am going to be fine, Adam. I promise you, I am not going anywhere." "You cannot promise that," Adam said roughly. "Women die in childbirth all the time. It is a dangerous thing, and I am terrified." "So am I," Grace admitted, "but fear will not change anything. We have to trust that God will see us through this." Adam pulled her close, his hand on her swollen belly. "I am praying for that, every day." Grace went into labor on a hot August afternoon, 3 days before her 25th birthday. The pains started slowly, just a tightening in her back that she ignored for the first few hours. But by evening, they were strong enough that she could not hide them anymore. Adam sent Daniel racing into town for the doctor and Mrs. Henderson, and then he paced the kitchen like a caged animal, while Sarah tried to help Grace and the younger children huddled together, frightened by their father's obvious fear. The labor was long and hard. Mrs. Henderson arrived first, taking charge with the competence of a woman who had delivered dozens of babies. The doctor arrived an hour later, examined Grace, and pronounced that everything was progressing normally, if slowly. Adam was allowed in the room for a while, holding Grace's hand and wiping her forehead. But when the pains grew worse and Grace started to cry out, Mrs. Henderson shooed him away. "You are not helping, hovering like that," she said firmly. "Go mind your children and let us do our work." Adam left reluctantly, and Grace could hear him pacing outside the door, could hear his low voice as he tried to reassure the children. She wanted to call out to him, to tell him she was all right, but another pain seized her, and she could only gasp and bear down when Mrs. Henderson told her to. It was nearly dawn when the baby finally came, slipping into the world with a wail that was the most beautiful sound Grace had ever heard. She fell back against the pillows, exhausted and shaking, as Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby and wrapped it in a blanket. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the tiny bundle in Grace's arms. "A healthy boy." Grace looked down at her son, at his red wrinkled face and his tiny fists, and felt love sweep through her so powerfully that it hurt. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama." The door burst open and Adam rushed in, his face pale and his eyes wild. "Grace, are you all right?" I heard the baby cry. "I am fine," Grace said, exhausted but smiling. "We are both fine. Come meet your son." Adam approached slowly, as if afraid that sudden movement might shatter the moment. He looked down at the baby in Grace's arms, and his expression crumpled. He sank to his knees beside the bed, reaching out with one shaking hand to touch the baby's cheek. "A son," he said hoarsely. "We have a son." "What shall we name him?" Grace asked. Adam was silent for a moment, looking from the baby to Grace and back again. "James," he said finally. "James Palmer Quinn, after your father and your maiden name, so that this boy will always know where his mother came from and what she gave up to be here with us." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. "That is perfect." Over the next few weeks, Grace recovered slowly, her body healing from the ordeal of childbirth. Adam hovered constantly, bringing her food and making sure she rested. The children were fascinated by the baby, all of them wanting to hold him and help care for him. Even the twins were careful around James, lowering their voices and moving gently so as not to disturb him. Sarah was especially helpful, taking over much of the housework so that Grace could focus on the baby. "I want to learn everything," she told Grace, "so that when I have babies of my own someday, I will know what to do." Grace smiled at her, this girl who was becoming more of a daughter every day. "You are going to be a wonderful mother someday." By September, Grace was back on her feet and managing the household again, with James strapped to her chest in a sling as she worked. It was exhausting, but it was also joyful, this life they had built together. 8 children now, ranging from Daniel at 11 to James at barely a month old. It should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt right, like this was what Grace had been meant to do all along. One evening in late October, after all the children were in bed and James was sleeping in his cradle, Grace and Adam sat on the porch watching the stars. Adam had his arm around her, and Grace was leaning against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Adam asked suddenly. "When Lily ran into you outside the general store?" "I remember," Grace said. "You looked so tired and so scared. I wanted to help you, but I did not know how." "I thought you were an angel," Adam said quietly, "sent to save me from drowning in my own life. I had been barely holding on, trying to do everything and failing at all of it. And then there you were, holding my daughter like she was precious, looking at me like I was worth something." Grace turned to look at him, seeing the emotion in his face. "You were worth something. You are worth everything." "I told myself I would not fall in love again," Adam continued. "I told myself that love only brought pain, that I was better off alone. But then I could not stop thinking about you. Every time I saw you in town, every time we talked, I fell a little more. And I was terrified, because I had failed at love 3 times already. What made me think the 4th time would be any different? Because this time, you found someone who was meant to be here," Grace said softly. "Someone who wanted this life, who wanted you and your children, and everything that came with it. You did not fail, Adam. You just had not found the right person yet." Adam pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "When people in town heard that I was courting you, they thought I was crazy. Mrs. Henderson told me later that half the town had bets on how long it would take before you left. 7 children from 3 failed marriages, they said. What woman in her right mind would take that on?" Grace laughed softly. "Do you know what I said when Mrs. Henderson told me about your children?" "What?" "I said that 7 children meant 7 hearts full of love, that you must have a lot of love to give if you had 7 children, and that I wanted to be part of that. Everyone else saw a burden. I saw a blessing." Adam was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "That is when I knew I was going to marry you. When Daniel came back from town that day and told me what you had said. He heard it from someone who heard it from Mrs. Henderson, and he came and repeated it to me word for word. 'That is a lot of love to give,' you said. 'No one had ever looked at my life that way before. Grace felt her throat tighten. "It is true, though. Look at what we have built together, Adam. 8 children, a home, a life. We are happy. That is more than most people ever get." "I love you," Adam said fiercely. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. You saved me, Grace. You saved all of us." "We saved each other," Grace corrected. "You gave me a family and a purpose. You gave me a life worth living. I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. Now, I wake up every day grateful to be alive." They sat together in the darkness, holding each other, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Inside, their children slept peacefully, safe and warm. It had been just over a year since Grace had stepped off that stagecoach into a life she could never have imagined. A year of hard work and harder lessons, of joy and fear and love so profound it hurt. But Grace would not have changed a single moment of it. The years that followed were full of the rhythms of ranch life, springs of planting and new calves, summers of hard work under the blazing sun, autumns of harvest and preparation for winter, winters of cold and snow and the warm glow of the fire. The children grew, each one developing their own personality and dreams. Daniel became a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with a good head for business. At 16, he was already running much of the ranch, freeing Adam to spend more time with the younger children. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman, kind and capable, who talked about becoming a teacher. Lily remained energetic and affectionate, a bright spot in every day. The twins Thomas and Michael were still rambunctious but had learned discipline and responsibility. Emma, no longer a baby, was a sweet, quiet child who loved animals and spent hours in the barn with the horses. And James, Grace, and Adam's son grew into a curious, bright boy who asked endless questions and followed his father everywhere. In the spring of 1876, Grace gave birth to another child, a daughter they named Catherine, after Adam's second wife. It was Grace's idea, a way of honoring the woman who had given Adam 3 of his children even if their marriage had not worked out. The older children were delighted to have another sibling, and James, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, the constant worry of frontier life. Daniel broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 14. Sarah nearly died of pneumonia the winter she was 13. The twins got into trouble more than once, fighting with other boys in town or pulling pranks that went too far. But through it all, Grace and Adam faced everything together. They made decisions as partners, worked side by side, and loved each other with a depth and constancy that only grew stronger with time. Adam never looked at another woman, never gave Grace any reason to doubt his devotion. And Grace poured her heart into their family, loving each child as fiercely as if she had given birth to them all herself. The people in Salt Lake City came to respect what the Quinns had built. They saw how the children thrived, how the ranch prospered, how Adam and Grace supported each other. The whispers about Adam's failed marriages faded, replaced by admiration for the family they had become. Mrs. Henderson, who had worried about Grace taking on such a burden, admitted that she had never seen a happier couple. In the summer of 1878, Grace gave birth to their 3rd child together, another boy they named David. The children now ranged from Daniel at 17 to baby David, 9 children in total, and the house was always full of noise and life. Grace often thought back to the first day she had arrived in Salt Lake City, alone and uncertain, and marveled at how much had changed. One evening, when David was about 6 months old, Grace and Adam were sitting on the porch as they often did, watching the sun set. Daniel was teaching Sarah how to drive the wagon, their voices carrying across the yard. Lily was helping the twins feed the chickens, and Emma and James were playing some elaborate game that involved sticks and a lot of running. Inside, Catherine was napping, and David was with Mrs. Henderson, who had come out for a visit and was delighted to cuddle a baby again. "Do you ever regret it?" Adam asked suddenly. "Taking all this on? You could have married someone without children, someone who could have given you an easier life." Grace looked at him in surprise. "Where is this coming from?" Adam shrugged, not quite meeting her eyes. "I was talking to a man in town today, someone new. He asked how many children I had, and when I told him 9, he looked at me like I was crazy. Said something about how my wife must be a saint to put up with it all. And I started thinking about how much you have given up for me, for us." Grace took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Adam Quinn, You listen to me. I have not given up anything. I have gained everything. Before I met you, I was surviving. Now, I am living. I wake up every morning surrounded by people I love, doing work that matters. Yes, it is hard. Yes, I am tired most of the time, but I am happy. Truly, deeply happy. And I would not trade this life for anything. Not even for a life of ease, where you did not have to work so hard, where you could have nice things. Grace laughed. Nice things? Adam, I have 9 children who love me, a husband who adores me, and a home that is full of life. What could be nicer than that? Fancy dresses and china dishes would not make me happier. This, right here, is everything I ever wanted. Adam pulled her close, kissing her temple. I do not tell you enough how much I love you, how much I appreciate everything you do. You show me every day, Grace said, in the way you look at me, in the way you help with the children, in the way you hold me at night. I never doubt your love, Adam. Not for a moment. I am a lucky man, Adam said softly. We are both lucky, Grace corrected. We found each other when we needed each other most. That is a rare gift. In the fall of 1880, Daniel announced that he wanted to start his own ranch. He was 19, old enough to strike out on his own, and he had found a piece of land about 10 miles north that was for sale at a good price. Adam was both proud and sad, knowing that his oldest son was ready to become his own man, but also knowing how much he would miss having Daniel around. Grace helped Daniel prepare, teaching him the finer points of running a household and making sure he knew how to cook more than just beans and bacon. When he finally left, riding off with a wagon full of supplies and a dream in his heart, Grace stood with Adam and waved until he was out of sight. Then she let Adam hold her while she cried, mourning the loss of her oldest child, even as she celebrated his independence. But Daniel came back often, and he brought news of his progress. He had built a small house, started a herd, and was courting a girl from town. When he married at 20, Grace and Adam hosted the wedding at their ranch, proud to see how well he had turned out. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes. Sarah became a teacher, just as she had dreamed, teaching in the one-room schoolhouse in Salt Lake City. Lily married a rancher from a neighboring spread when she was 18, and Grace helped her plan the wedding. The twins, inseparable as always, went into business together, buying and selling cattle. Emma, quiet and gentle, helped Grace at home and showed no interest in leaving. James, serious and studious, talked about becoming a lawyer someday. Catherine grew into a lively, talkative girl who was the darling of the family, and David, the baby, was doted on by everyone. In the spring of 1885, Grace and Adam celebrated their 12th anniversary. They were both older now, with Grace starting to thread through their hair and lines on their faces that spoke of hard work and laughter. But they were still deeply in love, still partners in every way. Mrs. Henderson came out for the celebration, and over dinner she raised her glass in a toast. To Adam and Grace Quinn, 12 years ago, half the town thought you were crazy to marry, a widower with 7 children and a young woman who did not know what she was getting into. But you proved us all wrong. You built something beautiful together, a family that is the talk of the territory. May you have many more years together. Everyone drank, and Grace looked around the table at her family, 9 children, ranging from Daniel at 24 to David at 7. Some of them were here, some were off living their own lives, but all of them knew they were loved. All of them knew they had a home to come back to. Thank you, Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for taking a chance on me, Adam. Thank you for letting me be part of this incredible family. Thank you for seeing something worth loving when everyone else saw a lost cause, Adam replied. Thank you for choosing us, for staying, for loving us even when it was hard. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They kissed to the cheers and groans of their children, and Grace felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time Adam kissed her 12 years ago. Some things, she thought, never changed. The love they shared was as strong now as it had been in the beginning, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven true. In the years that followed, Grace and Adam watched their children grow into adults, each one finding their own path. They became grandparents, delighting in the babies that Daniel and his wife brought to visit, in the children that Lily and her husband were raising. The ranch continued to prosper, and Adam finally had enough money to hire a few ranch hands, easing the burden on himself and the children still at home. But through it all, the constant was Grace and Adam's love for each other. They still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands, still talked about everything and nothing. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative, and had come out stronger for it. On a warm evening in June of 1895, Grace and Adam sat on their porch watching the sun set, as they had done countless times before. They were both in their 50s now, their bodies bearing the marks of a life of hard work. But they were content, surrounded by the life they had built together. "Do you remember what you said that first Sunday you came out to the ranch?" Adam asked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "When I told you about my failed marriages and all my children." "I remember," Grace said, leaning against him. "You said you were beginning to think you were not meant for marriage, and I thought how wrong you were. You told me I had a lot of love to give," Adam said. 7 children, you said, meant 7 hearts full of love. I never forgot that. It changed everything for me, the way you saw my life not as a burden, but as a blessing." Grace smiled, turning to kiss his cheek. "It was a blessing. It still is. I cannot imagine my life without you, without our children and grandchildren. You gave me everything I ever wanted, Adam." "We gave each other everything," Adam corrected. "I was drowning before I met you, Grace, barely holding on, failing at everything. And then you came into my life and made it all make sense. You turned chaos into order, despair into hope. You loved my children as if they were your own, and you gave me 3 more beautiful children to love. You are the reason our family is what it is." "We built it together," Grace insisted. "Every day, every decision, every challenge. We faced it all together, and that made all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. In the house behind them, they could hear Emma and David talking, hear the baby that Emma was helping to watch, another grandchild. The ranch stretched out before them, cattle grazing peacefully in the fading light. It was beautiful and hard-won and theirs. "I love you," Adam said softly. "I have loved you from the moment you held Lily and looked at her like she was the most important thing in the world. I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Grace replied. "You and all 9 of our children and all the grandchildren and this life we have built together. It has been hard, but it has been so very good." Adam pulled her closer, and they watched the stars come out together, 2 people who had found each other when they needed each other most, and had built something beautiful out of the wreckage of the past. They had proven that love was not about perfect circumstances or easy roads. It was about choosing each other every day, about working together, about seeing the blessing in the burden and the joy in the struggle. Years later, when their grandchildren asked Grace about her life, she would tell them about stepping off the stagecoach in Salt Lake City with nothing but $50 and hope. She would tell them about meeting Adam, about falling in love with him and his 7 children, about the people who thought she was crazy for taking on such a burden. And then she would smile and say, "But I looked at those 7 children and I saw 7 hearts full of love. I saw a man who had been knocked down 3 times and gotten up each time. I saw a family that needed someone to love them, and I had so much love to give. So I said yes, and it was the best decision I ever made." Because in the end, love was not about counting the costs or weighing the burdens. It was about seeing what others could not see, believing when others could not believe, and having the courage to say yes when everything seemed to say no. Grace had looked at Adam Quinn, at his 7 children, and his failed marriages, and his desperate need for help, and she had seen not a problem, but a possibility. That is a lot of love to give, she had thought. And then she had given it, freely and fully, for the rest of her days. The ranch continued to thrive under their care, and as the children married and had families of their own, the Quinn name became synonymous with hard work, integrity, and love in Salt Lake City and the surrounding territory. Adam and Grace became the elder statesmen of the family, the ones everyone came to for advice and support. On their 25th anniversary in 1898, all 9 of their children came home for a celebration. The house was bursting with people, children and grandchildren filling every corner. There was food and music and laughter, and as Grace looked around at the faces of her family, she felt her heart swell with gratitude. Daniel, now in his 40s, pulled Grace aside at one point. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "When you first came into our lives, I was not sure about you. I had seen 2 mothers leave, and then Rose died. I did not want to lose another mother, but you proved yourself over and over. You loved us when we were not always easy to love. You stayed when things got hard. You chose us, every single day, and that made all the difference." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh, Daniel, you were never hard to love. None of you were. You were gifts, all of you." "You were the gift," Daniel said firmly. "You saved our father, and you saved us. We are who we are because of you and Papa, because you showed us what real love looks like." Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. Sarah thanked Grace for teaching her to be strong and capable. Lily thanked her for showing her what a good marriage looked like. The twins, now successful ranchers themselves, thanked her for giving them structure and discipline when they needed it most. Emma, still living at home and helping with the ranch, thanked her for simply being there, a constant presence of love and support. And James, Catherine, and David, the 3 children Grace had given birth to, told her that they had always known they were loved just as much as their older siblings, that there had never been a moment when they felt like they were more important or more loved. Grace had made sure that all her children, whether born to her or not, knew they were equally precious. As the evening wound down and the children began to leave with their own families, Adam and Grace stood on the porch and waved goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, Adam turned to Grace and pulled her into his arms. 25 years, he said wonderingly. 25 years of being married to the most incredible woman I have ever known. 25 years of building a life with the man I love, Grace replied. And if God grants us another 25, I will count myself blessed. They did not get another 25 years, but they got close. Adam died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920, at the age of 73. He had lived to see all his children grown and settled, had held 22 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. He had worked his ranch until just a few months before his death, still strong and vital, even in his old age. Grace held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her face even as she thanked God for the gift of their life together. 47 years of marriage, of partnership, of love that had never wavered. It was more than most people ever got, and she was grateful for every moment. At his funeral, all 9 children came, bringing their families. The church in Salt Lake City was packed with people who had known Adam, who had respected him and admired what he had built. Grace sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children, and listened as the Reverend spoke about Adam's life, about his perseverance and his love for his family. But it was Daniel who gave the eulogy, speaking about the father he had known and loved. "My father was not a perfect man," Daniel said. "He made mistakes, had failures, faced losses that would have broken a lesser person. He was married 3 times before he found the woman who was meant to be his partner. But when he found her, when Grace Palmer stepped into our lives, everything changed. She saw what others did not see. Where they saw a burden, she saw a blessing. Where they saw failure, she saw potential. And together, my father and Grace built something beautiful. They built a family, a legacy, a life worth living. My father died a happy man, surrounded by people who loved him. And that is because of the choice he and Grace made to love each other, to work together, to never give up even when things were hard." Grace wept through the eulogy, but they were not entirely tears of sorrow. They were also tears of gratitude, of love, of recognition that she had been blessed beyond measure. She had taken a chance on a man with 7 children and 3 failed marriages, and he had given her a life of purpose and meaning and joy. Grace lived another 5 years after Adam died, cared for by Emma, who had never married and was content to stay on the ranch. Grace remained active and involved in her children's lives, delighting in watching the family continue to grow. She told stories to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, stories about the early days on the ranch, about how she and Adam had fallen in love, about the challenges they had faced and overcome. And always, when the children asked how she had managed to take on 7 children who were not her own, Grace would smile and say, "I looked at those children and I saw 7 hearts full of love. Your grandfather had been knocked down 3 times, but he got up each time because of those children, because he loved them so much. And I thought, that is a lot of love to give, and I wanted to be part of that. So I said yes, and it was the best decision I ever made." Grace Palmer. Quinn died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1925 at the age of 74. She was surrounded by family at the end, her children and grandchildren filling the house one last time. She died with a smile on her face, her last words a whisper of Adam's name. At her funeral, the church was once again packed, not just with family, but with the entire community. Grace had become a beloved figure in Salt Lake City, known for her kindness and her generosity, and her unwavering love for her family. The Reverend spoke about her life, about the choice she had made to embrace a ready-made family, about the legacy of love she had left behind. But it was Catherine, Grace's daughter, who spoke the words that everyone remembered. "My mother used to say that love was not about counting the costs or weighing the burdens. It was about seeing what others could not see, believing when others could not believe, and having the courage to say yes when everything seemed to say no. She lived that philosophy every day of her life. She took 9 children, some born to her and some not, and she loved us all equally and fiercely. She took a man who had been broken by loss and failure, and she showed him that he was worthy of love. She built a life that was hard and beautiful and full of joy. And she taught us all what it means to love without reservation, to give without counting the cost, to say yes even when it seems impossible. That is her legacy. That is what we will carry forward." The family buried Grace next to Adam on a hill overlooking the ranch, a place where they could see the land they had worked and the home they had built. The headstone read simply, "Grace Palmer Quinn, 1850-1925, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She had a big heart and gave love freely." In the years that followed, the Quinn family continued to grow and thrive. The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same dedication his parents had shown. The other children remained close, gathering for holidays and celebrations, always remembering the foundation their parents had built. They told their children and grandchildren the story of Adam and Grace, of how a woman with a big heart had looked at a man with 7 children from 3 failed marriages and said, "That is a lot of love to give." And those children and grandchildren passed the story down to their own children, a testament to the power of love and faith and choosing to see the blessing in the burden. It became a family legend, the story of how their family had been built, not on perfection, but on perseverance, not on easy circumstances, but on the choice to love anyway. Because in the end, that was what mattered, not the number of children or the failed marriages or the hard work. What mattered was that 2 people had found each other when they needed each other most, had chosen to build a life together despite the odds, and had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Grace had stepped off that stagecoach in Salt Lake City in 1873 with nothing but hope and a heart too big for her own good. And she had used that big heart to change not just one life, but many, to build something beautiful out of chaos, to prove that love, when given freely and without reservation, could transform everything. That was her gift to the world, and it was a gift that kept giving long after she was gone. The Quinn family remained strong and united, bound together by the example Adam and Grace had set, by the love they had shared, by the choice they had made to say yes to each other, and to the life they built together. And whenever the descendants of Adam and Grace faced their own challenges, their own moments of doubt or fear or uncertainty, they remembered the story. They remembered a woman who had looked at 7 children and seen 7 hearts full of love. They remembered a man who had been knocked down 3 times, but had gotten up each time because of those children he loved. They remembered that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as burdens, and that love is not about perfect circumstances, but about choosing to see the possibility in the problem. That was the legacy of Adam Quinn and Grace Palmer Quinn, a legacy built on one simple truth. When you have a big heart and you find someone with a lot of love to give, you say yes. You say yes to the chaos and the challenge and the hard work. You say yes to the possibility of something beautiful. You say yes to love, and that yes can change everything.